we doing? Craig Whitney here, founder of the Legacy Forge podcast and Next Level Coaching. Yeah, well, good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world, tuning in to another episode of the Legacy Forge podcast. I think we're up to episode number 5 now. Today, I've got a very special guest and a good friend of mine and a great mentor, Jeffrey Ross, who's the founder of the Hero Makers.
G'day, mate. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this conversation all week.
Beautiful, beautiful. Where we talk about leadership, legacy, and what it really takes to become a leader, to forge a life that outlasts us. That's what I've noticed in your project and the Hero Makers. I've followed you for a couple of years now, coming through all sorts of changes across the time. Theme remains the same. It's forging a legacy that the next generation can pick up and duplicate. It's the process of duplication.
Yeah.
So how are you arriving today? What's on your heart and mind right now?
Yeah, great question. And I love how you acknowledge just you've watched the journey unfold over the last couple of years, especially, right? But the thing that's never changed is the heartbeat. Yeah, look, okay, we may have zagged, we may have taken a few different pivots to get where we're going, but the mission's always remained the mission. And, that is about that legacy. That is about that multiplication sort of impact. And look, as you start to become a student of life, a student of leadership in this space, you can see very quickly, and if I reflect back in my 20s and even in my early 30s, it was very much about the Jeff Ross show. It was very much about, look, I can do this. Why can't anybody else do it? It was that air of arrogance and ego, if you will, that was driving the conversation. And it was all about how I could win. So, I've risen I've hit the $1 million sort of revenue mark a couple of times now, in those early days, and came down, crushing down just as hard, and in this time too, there's been a real spiritual growth in this journey, especially over this last decade. But I've come to realize that when you can reframe the conversation around leadership, and it's not about your needs, it's not about your attachment in that space, and you position it in a space of what I term servant-hearted leadership, and it's about the others, the impact that us partnering together can go create together, and it gets you out of this us versus them conversation and brings it back into this we collaborative conversation versus competition. And it's a much more rewarding and satisfying and purpose-driven conversation. And to have something that we're working towards that's bigger than us for the greater good, it gets us out of that ego space and brings us back into that humility space. And I love what Zig Ziglar used to say, when he was around. I followed a lot of the greats and still do. And Zig Ziglar used to say, if you basically want, go help other people to get what they want in life so you can have what you need in life. And so reframing the whole conversation about, really just supporting the Jeff Ross show to, okay, let's go create leaders who create other leaders, not just leaders who create followers. It's about, that service to the greater good, figuring out that, what Jim Collins calls the sweet spot in his book, Good to Great, the ikigai spot. So figuring out what is my skills, what is my passion and purpose, and who's the ideal marketplace that I can serve. That is a profitable conversation, right? So it's all about that profit engine as well. But it's not about the money, it's about the impact. And the more resources that we have from the source, the bigger impact that we can have together. So that's the reframe, if you will. I had to go through and deframe my viewpoint of leadership and become that student. And then so when I deframed it, I was then able to reframe it to be able to have that higher, more intellectual conversation. And as soon as I did that, especially over this last 3 years, by just coming into the conversation and just going up to, people that I admire and aspire to be like, and just going, instead of having my hand out and saying, here, I can do X, Y, Z for you, but you got to pay me to do it, taking that conversation away and going, it's not even about the money. It's just, I love your mission. I love your vision. I love your core values. How can I help? Mm-hmm. And as soon as I started reframing things and asking that question, man, the doors started opening up, and the partnerships that have grown from that relationship and that with myself and that conversation has just been very blessed to be a part of the conversations that I'm a part of now because of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. You touched on servant-hearted leadership and legacy. Legacy is a huge part of my passion and this podcast and everything that sort of centers around our circle. And certainly, absolutely, the theme that I'm hearing is a good part of leadership, and you could agree to this or not, is as leaders, we move forward, we duplicate other leaders. We just don't want fans. We just don't want the high fives, the politician style leadership where you're just getting followers and fans to give you the high five, to get the votes, to get you in the door. We want actual leaders who can run with us, team members, packs, other leaders who create other leaders, and diving into building that long, everlasting legacy. And Zig Ziglar is definitely an example of that, and I still am a follower of Zig to this day. He was one of the early mentors or speakers that I met in my sales career when I first got around personal development, along with Bob Proctor and a few of the greats, and definitely pulled my head into gear because, in my 20s and early 30s, I was definitely in that, I suppose, that showmanship, that performance stage.
Let's just dive into that for a second, if you might mind, because this is what our culture breeds. Our culture in our Western world specifically, it breeds this mentality. Like you and I, right? We grew up watching, sports and rock stars and celebrities, get this fame and fortune and everything else in between, right? From this consumeristic, individualistic culture that we find ourselves in today. And that's what we were conditioned to believe that's what success looks like. So we go and model, right? We go and model without really knowing, being naive and ignorant to this conversation. We go model our limited viewpoint of chasing that success. But as I've done that myself, and I know you've done this as well, as we've done that, we've come to realize very quickly on that it's empty, it's superficial. And we're always finding ourselves to striving and never arriving in this space. And so in my early 20s and my 30s, I lived that hedonistic lifestyle, looking for, chasing for what my viewpoint of success looked like. And I did. I hit the $1 million marks a few times along that way, but it was always never enough. It was insatiable. It was always hungry, never satisfied. And in that space, and then you go into that self-sabotaging mode. And that's what I did. Like I self-sabotaged myself, and things came crashing back down to that bottom ground. And till I was humble enough to open up to the heart and the head of the conversation to look for something deeper in that space. And, we don't need to go into it too much today, but I was an atheist at that time, and I found Jesus in that conversation. And that part of that learning to love something bigger than myself really transformed my viewpoint and ignited what was already there, like the base core element, the gifting, if you will, the skills that were there, but gave it a new lens to look through. And instead of putting people up like my father and the famous rock stars and celebrities of today, putting them up on pedestals, I took that away. And for me, I put Jesus up on that pedestal. And it's not that I'm trying to conform to impress Jesus, but I know it was more about how I saw them, how they see me. I was essentially setting myself up for failure, trying to conform and perform for the self-imposed expectations that I put on myself, that the way that I thought that they wanted me to act. And as soon as I eliminated that conversation and that attachment to that, that's where a deeper, more robust, holistic viewpoint started to really form in me in that space. And that's where that whole hero makers, legacy, impact, leadership conversation, has come today. So yeah, I do think that, you and I and people like us, need to challenge the narrative of what true leadership is all about, especially in today's culture. And what I see very clearly, that there's a lie that's been conditioned in this whole leadership circle from the naive for the masses. And, that style of leadership is not leadership. That's just creating fans. It's creating followers. It's the OnlyFans sort of influence that our Western world has been impacted by and conditioned by and that type of thing. But when you get back down to the true essence of leadership, when you get that lens taken off and essentially you waken up, you're illuminated in that conversation, you can see straight away what John Maxwell talks about as leadership as influence, nothing more, nothing less. But let's unpack that word influence in today's context. Influence has not been a TikTok influencer and having millions of followers, hanging off your every word because of hype and blah, blah, blah. That's not influence. Yes, I know they're called influencers, right? Because they have the gift of the gab, if you will, to either inspire or manipulate people. But true leadership, and what John Maxwell's talking about in this space, is that I see in you conversation, Craig. You know, that I see the greatness in you, and it's my responsibility, if you will, to help pull out that greatness so that you can step up to your highest form, your highest potential. And in that journey as being a guide to one another, you can do the same thing. And as you develop and as your leadership giftings up level, then you get that, you go do the same thing for your people, and then you teach your people that DNA. And that's where we get that true multiplication, generation after generation impact in that space.
Exactly right. A couple of things you've mentioned there. So we move from the TikTok rock star. Now, the rock star energy is an archetype out of Carl Jung's work, of one of the many 30-something archetypes he's got in his collection. The rock star certainly has their place.
Yeah, of course.
In society.
In a healthy context, yes.
Yeah, the definition of a rock star is to lead the play, and the point of difference, not lead the people. If that makes sense to our listeners out there. We have a culture in society at the moment of that rock star style leadership, where it's just all, the rock stars, the influencers, the OnlyFans vibes. They're all leading the play and they're leading the people. There's no solid backbone leadership. Or on the other side, you've got leaders, the old school 1970s and 80s style leaders that are leading from fear. Ego, which I grew up a lot with, coming from the bush, working in sawmills and in and around abattoirs. It's that fear. A lot of them, they taught me some work ethic.
Yeah, I grew up in that environment too, so I understand what you're talking about.
Work like a dog and stuff like that and prove your worth.
Hard,
that 1980s style leadership doesn't fit the mold anymore. It's too hard on the culture. We need to duplicate more leaders, not more drones or slaves, if so to speak. We need more leaders to duplicate.
Let's just reframe that for a second. So if you took that style leadership and instead of leading from fear, started to flip the coin and led from truth with love, then it's a whole different conversation, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole different conversation. We can share that what I call radical honesty with each other. We shift from the vulnerability to that radical honesty. So it's empowering. So truth is empowering. It's like, whoa, I can walk into a team, a culture, and go, whoa, I'm part of this family. Like, wow, let's go. Let's grow, and let's grow others. Let's duplicate this process. It's like, wow, everyone's out of their silos. We're all united together, united in truth.
Yeah.
So moving on, we go from the performance into truth. We stand in our truth, and I've surrounded myself with leaders, some of you who stand in truth. And sometimes that truth can be it has a sting attached to it at the best of times.
It's meant to. And you need people who can hold you to an account and ownership and responsibility. If you don't have that, then you're back in that ego space.
Exactly. As what Robert Dilts mentions in a lot of his teachings, it's looking at someone's identity and then moving from that ego state, where it's all about me, to that soul state, and then walking that identity triangle to have that highest purpose at play, whether that's Jesus, whether, whatever that, what I call that off-planet desire, or that legacy that I've mentioned many times over my time, that spiritual legacy. So the story, what's the story behind Hero Makers? Because it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
Yeah. Look, it's what's my story? It's the level of the growth in that space. I suppose to give our listeners some context, I need to share the story of essentially how I tried to commit suicide, and have some grounding and have some base in that conversation there to be able to see the formation of the growth in that journey, if you will. So 11 years ago, I got to a place where I was in a massive identity crisis. I grew up working on the land. I left school at year 9 and never completed my schooling. I got my year 10 certificate through basically learning school online way back then, doing by correspondence type sort of thing. But I was severely bullied as a kid at school, and just the whole school environment for me was just toxic. So I chose to get into the workforce early and leave school, because it wasn't like I wasn't learning anything. I was I was mucking up and I was hanging around with the wrong crowd. I'm trying to impress people. So, yeah, parents and I decided the best thing for us was that school's not serving me. Let's go. So I transitioned to a cabinet maker apprenticeship. I did that. By the time I sort of finished that, my mates were just finishing high school at that same time. So I had to learn how to grow up pretty quickly in certain areas, but in the same time, I never really did because I did it on my own. So, I've gone from leaving school early to doing a trade to then working on cattle stations and horse studs and, farming as a labourer and as a ringer. Well, for our American friends, that's a ranch hand. And, that was my lifestyle very much, 1990s sort of Australian bushman, cowboy up sort of, type sort of lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, gee up, yep, G up, like, let's go. And, harden up, buttercup sort of type attitude, and so you couldn't share your feelings or anything like that in that space because that just wasn't allowed in that environment. And, took the piss out of each other and, that type of thing, but you worked hard and you partied hard. You lived for the moment type sort of culture. And so I grew up in that space. And by the time I was 20, I was out every weekend, living for the weekend, drinking and partying, gambling away pretty much my paycheck every week. So by the time I get paid on Thursday, it was gone Friday morning. So living for week, night for night in that space. And then I had an accident with a horse when I was 26. I had a horse jump on my neck in the breeding stables. And lucky to be walking, lucky to be talking, all of that sort of stuff now. But the results of that accident was I ended up with 3 crushed discs in the back of my neck. D3, 4, and 5 are crushed and C6 is bulging. I went back to work with that pain and probably never really took time off to heal properly and, thought I was, well, I'm not sure if I could be this open, but I'll say it anyway, young and dumb and full of, you know what, in that sort of attitude. And, so went back to work a little bit too early. At this stage, I got married at 29. So from 26 to 29, I was living in like a massive amount of pain. The doctors diagnosed me with chronic pain syndrome by the age of sort of 30, wrote me off and put me onto a disability pension because I lost my right mobility in my right arm. I had to retrain that as well and all that due to all the nerve damage in that space. In that period, I transitioned from working on the land to get into sales, and I sort of, I thought that would, I'm not having to work as hard on my back, so it wouldn't be as hard. And so I actually found a college in Brisbane called the National College of Business. And I started my sales career in timeshare and selling business coaching and all of that sort of thing, and found that I loved that conversation and had a natural gift just to be able to communicate with people and meet people where they're at. Was very successful at that. But then we moved from Brisbane to Grafton's because my mother-in-law ended up having cancer. And so we made the decision that Sarah, my wife at the time, we only been married for about 12, 18 months, to make the decision so Sarah could go down and live with her mum and be her full-time carer in that space. So I was already in massive amounts of pain. And so pretty much overnight, I had a very successful job in Brisbane, getting high 6 figures. Sarah was in university. And so we got married. The first 12, 18 months of our marriage was like just bliss. But then everything started to fall apart. My accident come back and bit me on the ass. I ended up on a disability pension. Sarah's ended up as her mum's full-time carer on a carer's pension. So we've gone from living this, what was perceived to be a successful lifestyle in Australia to being on Centrelink payments pretty much overnight. We had a little bit of a runway there that lasted about 7 months. Goes pretty quickly. And so in that process, I lost my identity. I lost my reason for being. And so during that time, Sarah and I have Harrison, who is our oldest son now. He's now 13, going on 14. And Sarah was pregnant again with young Lachlan. So we go through that period for about 2 to 3 years. And, then Sarah loses her mum in that space. So I'm just going downward spiral at this stage. Our marriage was all over but the shouting. Sarah and I thought one last ditch attempt to make this work. So we thought the only way that we could make it work was to move interstate, get away from our family influence that were pretty toxic at the time. So we packed up the family, me, Sarah, 2 kids, Harrison 2 and Lachlan at 2 months at this stage. Moved down to Tasmania. 9 months into that journey, it just all came to a front. Like I thought I was trying to escape everything and start again. I thought it would be great, and all that, and it wasn't. So I got to a point where I really thought that the world would be better off without me. And So I got to a point one night, in that journey early in our first couple of months in Tasmania, about 9 months now. I had the bottle of Jamisons in one hand, had the bottle of Lyrica and Tramadol and all of the horse drugs that I was on in the other. I basically psyched myself up and convinced myself this is it. The world will be better off without me. And straight as at 2 o'clock in the morning, as I was about to do it, my son Harrison walks in. At this time, you've got to realise he's only 2. He's always a sound sleeper. We never had any problems with him. But he walks into that bathroom at that night and looks up at me in brown eyes and says, "Dad, what are you doing?" And I realise now, and what I say now, looking back at it, love interrupted the pattern. And I realised how selfish I was going to be at the moment. And I also just want to pause here for a second. And if you're in this frame of mind in your life, reach out and talk to someone. Don't do this on your own, because that's what I've had to do. I know Craig's had to do the same journey. And so very important that you reach out and talk to someone. And that person, you need to talk to someone who's probably not attached to you in a family way or even like a mate's way, someone who has your best interest at heart, someone who can see past the hurt, the mess, the anger even in that space, and just see you for who you really are. And so go talk to a professional, go talk to a pastor, a priest, or whatever, right? Whatever works best for you in that space, but go talk to someone. And that's what I did. So a week later after that whole episode, I reached out to my business coach at the time. And I just said to Celine, I just said, look, this is what's going on. I basically just word vomited all over her, and just, it was the first time I'd sort of really spoken to anybody. And it just all came pouring out of me. Once I started, I couldn't stop, in ugly crying, messy face and all that thing. And she just saw me for who I was and who I could be. And she just introduced me to my friend Tim. And Tim took me on a journey of what I call discipleship. Tim was our senior pastor of our church. And I knew that he was our pastor. And at this stage, I was an atheist. And I grew up in an atheistic family. And anything that came on religious on TV, my father would go, "Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah," taking the piss and the mickey out of it all. And sort of like I was the kid that was sent to school with a note to the teachers, "My son is not allowed to attend any religious classes whatsoever." So I was really sheltered from this whole spiritual conversation and faith conversation. So I realized at that time that I was what I now call myself a naive, ignorant atheist. I only adopted my father's point of views because that was what his pure views were, his hurt and his story. So I was put into a cross point in my life where I had to be challenged the narrative and, doubt and struggle and all that sort of things. I went into that journey with an open heart and an open mind. And I just said to Tim, I said, "Look, I'm an atheist, but I've tried the world's way. The world's way has failed me. I've got no idea about who this Jesus fella is, but I'm open to exploring it." And so I stepped into that space with an openness. And within 6 weeks, I started to, what the Bible had to say, it spoke to my identity. It spoke to the gaps that were in my life and my heart and the brokenness of that. And so it met me where I was at in that pain and that brokenness. And it gave me a sense of hope. I used to say to people before then that hope's a dangerous thing. Hope only sets you up for failure. But now reframing that conversation, hope is what pulls us up and gives us purpose and meaning in life. So I started to get that sense of hope back into that space. And in that space, I learned very, very quickly that I didn't love myself. And how could I love anybody else? How could I love something bigger than myself? How could I love Sarah properly, my boys properly, and deeply in the way that they need me to step up in that? So I was a little boy, really. I was a boy in a man's body. And I realized I hadn't really grown up. So in that journey, very quickly, I started to do, Strengths Finder. I did the Gallup Strength Finder. I did DISC. I did Myers-Briggs. I did the Enneagram. And I started going into that conversation, really learning to, who is Jeff Ross? I knew that there was some natural skills there because I've had success. Like, in my youth, I was the junior national champion of Australia for Western Pleasure. I was in ice hockey. I was goalie for the New South Wales representative team. In Army cadets, I was, I went to the rank of warrant officer class 1. So, I've had positional rank leadership type sort of thing, and I've had tastes of success. And so the natural skill was there. And, but the foundations of the real core identity values piece was missing. And so really flapping around in the wing, in that conversation. And so I had to go deep into that self-identity and that self-worth and that self-love and that self-evaluated conversation. So for very quickly in that journey, I realized that the big missing piece for me was a spiritual piece, faith. So I did give my life to the Lord Jesus and basically been on that discipleship journey. And discipleship, it's not Christianity. Even, if you look at the deep study of the Bibles, the apostles of the Bibles didn't call themselves Christians. They didn't identify as Christians. That was the word that the Romans used for that club, for that group of people. So, I identify as now in this position as a disciple of Christ. So Jesus is the person who is at the top of everything as that head of the body, the head of the leadership conversation. And then there are people between me and Jesus who are discipling me in that space to be more like Jesus, to come into that, obey his commands for our lives. And quite simply, let's just put it down to learning how to love myself, to learn how to love God, and to learn how to love others. Conversation is the DNA of it all, the root of it all. And if you break it down, this style of leadership, discipleship, it is a hero maker's conversation. And so, to be a disciple, the commandment is to go make other leaders who are following the same footprints, who are modeling the same behavior, who are going in the one heart, the one body, one direction. And so the direction is is eternal heaven with Jesus in that space. So that's the mission, if you will. So getting very clear on the purpose and the direction and the mission of it all and the why of it all. And then, then you come back into that self-worth, self-love, self-evaluated conversation. Is what this allows us to do is to show up our way. We're not confined by, really rigid structure. We have roots like an oak tree, like it goes deep and those foundations grow deep in that space. But like an oak tree with deep roots can flap around in gale force wind and still bend and be malleable and still stay in the same point, going the same direction in that growth journey. So it's for me, this whole conversation, I use hero maker as the term because that's a word that the secular world can wrap their head around without getting hung up on religiosity terms and labels and stuff. But the reality is it's disciple making. So disciples who make other disciples who make other disciples. This is what's worked for 2,000 years since the early church, and why we still have such a big movement in today's world. But if you look at the Western world church model, and when you can look at it through this lens, you start to see that it's fundamentally broken. The systems are just not there to support the mission. The mission is discipleship. But if you look at the Western world's church model, that it's proven, right? You go back to when three very prominent pastors at that time, they went to Harvard Business University and they said, we want to create a business model for church to be able to help us to, achieve our goals. So the Harvard Business University lens, what do? Right? They think about funnels, they think about systems, they think about structure. And so the Western world church model as we had today, like the operating system, if you will, the OS, is fundamentally broken. Because it's designed, if you look at the top of the funnel conversation, it's to get people into a room, into a building. So this is why we have things like megachurch, and we have tens of thousands of people coming in. And the Harvard Business University lectures said, right, well, what we need to do is we need to have a pulpit where we have a pastor preaching to the masses, and we have worship. So we have like the worship come in with the music, and essentially, what you're doing is entertaining the masses and informing the masses. There's no discipleship in that conversation. So, if that's the operating system, that's the entry point to the operating system. You look at that model and the stats prove that, okay, let's say we've got 100 people, right? They come into that model. Then the next level down of leadership is volunteerism. So volunteering for the setup community, volunteering for the parking committee, volunteering for the worship community, the welcome community. It's all just looking how we volunteer to serve the show conversation. And inside that, you'll find probably 25% of those people will want to step into some sort of deeper leadership role, which is maybe becoming small group leaders and start the discipleship conversation because that's what they're hungry for. And inside that, the stats only prove that we're 2% effective. If you go from all the way down from 100 people, we're only discipling 2 people out of 100. who are actually going and making other disciples, who are making other disciples, who are making other disciples. So if that's the case, then we talked about it, the influence of TikTok, the rock style sort of, celebrity sort of leadership. And even our churches are, infused with this style of leadership conversation. It's not really leadership. It's superficial.
Yeah.
It's just entertainment. Performance, right? It's just a performance. So how about we look at this from a different lens and we come back to the core roots of what we're actually called to do in this conversation and start with discipleship. Let's flip the script. Let's flip the table upside down. And so right from day one, just like Tim did with me in that story, it's starting with the focus on discipleship. Now, discipleship in this conversation is very, very easy. The blueprint is, okay, you've got to learn how to love yourself. All right, so it's not about coming from an ego and a pride conversation. It's working out what is your mission, what is your values, what is your vision, what is your skill sets, what are the things you stand for, what are the things you stand against, what's the hero of your story, what's the villain of your story. Things that I teach in our marketing business, right? Your personal brand is the story people talk about you when you're not in the room. So it comes back from that heart, that foundation. Now, if you just stay there, though, then that's where you do feed the ego. So learning to love something bigger than yourself in this equation is Jesus. So how do I be in relationship with Jesus? Not just read the Bible and think that he's a teacher with a slave master with the stock whip, cracking the whip and saying, I have to do it his ways. No, that's not free will. That's conformity. That's slavery. That's subjugation. So how do I be in relationship with Jesus, just like I'm in relationship with Sarah? So learning how to be in relationship with Jesus for me taught me how to be a better husband, taught me how to be a better father, taught me how to be a better friend, taught me how to be a better mentor, taught me how to be a better leader in that conversation, because I went deep, and I went deep into this space. Who is this Jesus? What does he stand for? How can I be in relationship with him? Well, just like Sarah, my beautiful wife, and if I don't talk to her about, all of the good, the bad, the ugly, everything between life, that's the thing, then that's not necessarily a relationship. So I talk to Sarah the same way I talk to Jesus. And so we have conversations with God in that space. So we say in our marriage that there's three people, right? Our marriage only works because there's me, there's Sarah, but then there's also Jesus in the middle of it all. He's entwined, he's infused. It's a part of the DNA of our conversation. There is no Jeff and Sarah without Jesus. There is no Jordan Ross family without Jesus. There is no bigger community without Jesus in the middle of it all. It's infused. It can't be separated. It's integrated. And then by learning how to do those two things powerfully, I learned how to become a more effective communicator. I learned how to be more equipped as a leader to teach others how to do the same thing. And I'm still on that journey. I'm far from perfect, and I never will be, but realizing that that's the growth journey that we're on, then you can't help be intentional with growing up, with leveling up, with helping to rise the tide so others rise with you, to have connections like, Craig and Jade and Dave and Michael Silvers and Joseph McClendon and, all of these people in our circle, in our sphere, because we're all running the same race, just in our own different way.
Exactly right. So I'm hearing a lot of themes and moments that come up that progressively helped grow you into full commitment to your mission. So I'm hearing the big one of love. Come in two components. So there's self-love, which is pretty much the most important one and the biggest one I've struggled with over the years, and love for others.
Mm-hmm.
And commitment or faith in self, faith in others, and faith in the highest purpose.
Yes.
Whether that's Jesus or all that off planet. And we talk about leadership as in discipleship. So we're creating disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really interesting. A lot of what I've dived into is fourth generation teaching, which is being modeled off a lot of the current spiritual leaders. And I use that term spiritual, not religious, after what we just covered about the business.
Oh yeah, and just on that, like I am actually an online part. Well, I'm not an accredited pastor. I'm working towards that. But I identify as an online church pastor because my wife and I started an online church as part of this conversation 18 months ago. But we haven't called it a church. We've called it a discipleship community. In that space, it's funny, right? Because people who don't know the story, don't know the depth of it all, judge and condemn for whatever. And that's okay. That's their journey. But I say to people, I might be on this journey as a person who's a disciple of Jesus, but I'm the furthest person. I'm the most anti-religious person you'll ever meet in your life. Because for me, it's not about religion. It's about the leadership principles. It's about relationship. It's about faith. Religiosity and legalism, that's parasitical. And that's the stuff that actually is the villain of my story, if you will, the shit that I stand against.
Yes, when we dive into the world of religion or conformity, we get the other side of the coin, which breeds rebellion.
Right?
I'm a product of rebellion.
My father, that's in that higher power conversation. The moment you put a block in that, that's ego, that's pride, that's arrogance coming into the conversation. Our job as disciples here in this space is to be a bridge. And when you look at me, I'm just a bridge to help you to the transformational conversation which is required of you in this discipleship journey, because the fruit of any sort of discipleship is transformation. If you're not doing, if you're just coming along and you're just you're being informed, you're being entertained, you're just ticking the boxes, well then you'll stay like you are. You're not going to transform because you're not doing the messy, hard inner work that's required of you to go into this space.
Exactly right. And there's work to be done. Transformation's not easy. It's not an easy path, and it can be painful for some. However, it's the catharsis. I'll get that word right. To change.
Yes.
Transformation is made to be a struggle.
Yes.
The caterpillar doesn't just wake up one day and I'm a butterfly. No, there's a process to go through. There's that whole process of breaking out, forming the cocoon and going through that evolution and going through the struggle of breaking out. However, once that breakage has gone underway and the butterfly has escaped, you get this magnificent creature who's giving that gift of color to its environment.
And what most people don't realize about that struggle is that breakdown part and breaking it down to that base DNA GUI level mess to be built back up. And that's why a lot of people shy away from this conversation, because they don't want to go through that breakdown. They don't want to lose the attachment of their comfort zone.
No, they don't want to get uncomfortable with themselves or with those around them. Particularly what I've noticed with men is working with men over the years is continuously going back to that trauma over and over and over. So you get that repetitive loop.
One thing I've noticed, and I'll ask you a question on this, is I've seen the same thing too, but do you feel that it's pride that's the main block?
Yes. And studies have shown that continuously revisiting the trauma over and over actually re-traumatizes you worse over time than the actual experiential of the experience. Psychs have suggested, yes, go do a process, go do that, but do it once and snip it well. And you might have to go back for little top-ups now and then for conversations, but the core process, it's a once-off journey. Once you start, don't stop. Go through it.
Yeah.
As ugly, as messy, as whatever it may be to deal with that problem, once it's started, it cannot be stopped. It'll either drag you or you'll take control of it.
Or you're going to go around the merry-go-round a few times until you actually decide to get off it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, what practices keep you on a day-to-day basis with your mission when the pressure's on? Because I know you're a workhorse, an absolute workhorse.
And that's one thing I'm grateful for my father that did bring me in that attitude of, there's the toxic side of the conversation, hard yakka to hustle and can lead to burnout and grind in that space. But I actually had a conversation with Dave about this yesterday, and I've got very clear on this as I grow in my own journey, that if your alignment is not matching your assignment, then you're going to burn out.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you've got to come into alignment. So alignment is getting clear on what the head and the heart and the hands are called to do, and that's the assignment part, which is what the calling is. So I'm very clear on my calling of my life, which is this hero makers conversation. And there's many facets to that diamond on the ways that I'm operating in that space. But that level of clarity creates a level of obsession and crazy, if you almost will, to most people. To do the crazy things like fly across to America for a week. I'm going up there next week because I feel like I'm called to be a part of the room and to create that bigger, deeper impact. So understanding that this level of calling and this level of obsession, it's not for everybody. It's not for the faint-hearted, and that's okay. But also for those who are yearning for more in life, they're the change makers of the world, what Steve Jobs calls the troublemakers, the rule breakers, the change makers when you hear his speech, in that space. This is this is for the ones who are here to challenge the status quo. They're not comfortable with how things are. And so if that is part of you, then getting clearer on what your alignment and your assignment is a part of that conversation. And then realizing that there's a huge cost to pay. Your time, energy, and money is going to be part of the cost and the sacrifice. So Sarah and I have had a lot of deep conversations around this with, we've got 3 young boys, and part of the cost that I'm not prepared to pay is to be like my father who, and he did what he had to do, right? Because of the skill set and the technology of the time in the 80s and the 90s. The only way that he knew how to provide for his family was to, work hard. And he was the way he chose to do that. And in the way that he fell into it was his truck driving. He was a hay carter. Carting hay from Cowra to Sydney back and forth all the time. And then he started a chaff cutter. So my father, and love him. We've got a bit of a strained relationship, but still love my father. But he was never there. He was a workaholic in that space. And, I would, but as he would show his love through money. He would buy us gifts. I know that now. But I had the horses, I had all the shows, I had the bikes, but I would have given all of that up if I had more quality time with my father and a deeper connection with him, but that never happened. So I never want to be that for my boys. So that's very much a deep-seated thing and a driving force with what we're building here. So learning how to put the structure and the boundaries as part of this obsession and this calling, if you will, is a major, major piece to this. Because without it, then you do fall into that hustle and grind culture and you will be burnt out. So learning things like, the greats like John Maxwell, Jim Collins, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Bob Proctor, all of these guys that talk about in this conversation. So, and modeling their type of behavior, their lessons is a big part of that. And one of the conversations here is putting the disciplines in, is putting the big rocks in first. So figuring out what are those big rocks. There's an experiment done. There's a YouTube clip that you can go find it. Basically, you got a jar and you've got all this sand and you've got all these rocks, and the objective here is to get all of it in the jar. Now, if I put all the sand in first and then try to put the rocks on top, I'm never going to fit them all in. But if I put the big rocks in first and then pour in the sand can fit in or around the crevices and all that sort of things. I'm very strict on my calendar. My calendar doesn't rule me; it's the other way around. But I'm very, very strict. If it's not in my calendar, it doesn't get done. And when it's family time, it's family time. When it's I'm on a mission to lose a lot of weight, so there's some fitness time is one of the big rocks that I've got to put in there, and that's a whole nother conversation because I've got some stories to change in that. But it's now making sure that I put time in for fitness and health. It's time, I start my day in solitude with the Bible, reading the good news. So, it's starting my day each day with meditation, with journaling, not just reading the Bible, but actually what I call soaping, reading a chapter of the Bible a day, and then what piece of scripture jumps out for me that speaks to my heart and that's why it's called the living word. So what speaks to me in that space and the lessons that I'm, with my circumstances and the environment that I'm in today, and I allow that to speak to my heart. So whatever jumps off the page, it may be the whole chapter, it may be just one word, it may be a sentence or a phrase or whatever it does. And then I observe that. So why did that jump out for me? What is the observation? What is the lesson? What is the wisdom in that piece that I need to take away for this time in my life? But it doesn't stop there, right? As Tony Robbins talks about knowledge is great, but we need applied knowledge for action. So what is the application? So scripture, observation, application. So how can I apply this lesson to my life? And in this conversation, when you've read the same scripture over and over and over again, you go into that self-evaluation, that self-growth, that self-identity question. And also prayer is that conversation piece with God. So, bookending everything in prayer, starting and closing everything in prayer. And I know some people who are not in that realm, they would call it meditation in that space. But essentially, it's quietening the noise and quietening the distractions and that be still and know I am God conversation. And so that gets me out of my head and that gets me back into my heart piece from that journey. Now, am I doing that every day? No. I am human. I make mistakes, and there's some days where I wake up and I don't feel like doing it, and I don't do it. But I aim to do it more than not in that space. And I know that the days I don't do it, and then if I wake up, I'm just on my phone and my messages and all of that, I feel hurried. I feel busy. I don't feel productive. So there's a difference between busy and productive. And, I'm growing in that journey as well. And so, having the big rocks first in your calendar and make sure the calendar, you're ruling your calendar, not the other way around. Taking time to bring in some of those disciplines like the spiritual journaling in that space. And then, some of the other things like, every month at the start of new month, I will do a dump list and I will prioritize. Anybody says to me they don't have time or they're too busy, what they're really saying is it's not a high priority for them. And that's okay. But acknowledge it for what it is rather than just using a bullshit excuse. And by understanding my core values, my core mission, my core vision, I can essentially create what I call a cultural line. And you need these boundaries, if you will. And one of the boundaries for me is to always look at ways to show up where I can live a life above the line, operate above the line. Above the line is ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And our natural default as humans is understanding this, that our natural default is to live life below the line. Just the way that our brain and our psychology and our neuroscience works is our natural default is to go into blame, excuse, and denial, because that keeps us safe in that space. And it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem, blah, blah, blah. But when you understand and educate yourself on all of these things, you can understand that, to elevate the conversation, we need to live life above the line. So there's a few things in that con there just right now. But part of the other disciplines too is making sure that I'm feeding this tool with great information. Like I'm reading books, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm having amazing conversations during the day that are looking for ways to elevate, to work towards the mission, conversation, right? So without the mission, you're just flapping in the wind. With the mission, that gives you a North Star. It gives you a GPS north point to always work towards. Will you get off track? Of course you will. The story of the when the rocket left Earth, went to the moon, it had its GPS to get to where it needed to be. It had its North Star. It knew where it had to go, which is the moon, and the exact spot on the moon that it had to go. But it was only ever on track for 3% of the time. And that's life, We might go through understanding that we're on our mission, but we get off track, we get out of alignment, we get off assignment. And the reality is you only need to be on track 3% of the time to get where you need to be. So it's understanding that if you're on track more than not, if you can increase that 3% to 10%, to 20%, to 30%, well, then you're going to get there a lot faster. And that's the understanding and the awareness and the awakening, if you will, of what we're all about.
Exactly. I'm hearing a lot of presence there, Jeff, big time. The head's, in my experience, is always thinking ahead. I need a calendar. I need a diary. Because the head's thinking, what's next?
That's the tradition piece,
what's next? The heart says, no, well, what's now? My darling Marina pressures me with that all the time because we're polar opposites, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Calendar, logic, okay, let's organize. Where she's like, no, burn the diary. Let's just be here now. Let's just focus on the now because now's all we got.
But it's not an either or conversation. It's an and conversation.
Exactly right. All righty. So presence is the big thing that I'm hearing, and a lot of process of habits, what you do on a day-to-day basis of filling the jar with the big rocks first and then working your way down to the sand. So what would you say to leaders who are listening who feel tension between chasing the success, and I'll use that term lightly, and building something of permanence?
Yeah, great question. If you're chasing success, you're out of alignment. You aren't clear on what your purpose is. You aren't clear on your values. You aren't clear on what the heart piece of the conversation is. And you're running the wrong race. If you're chasing success without that, if you're just chasing success for the purpose of success, I don't chase success. I chase it's not even chasing. I work towards impact. And so
Impact is huge.
for me, the definition of success versus impact is a totally different conversation. So first and foremost, stop trying to chase success. Because success is a results measurement. It's a lag measurement. It's not the thing that we work towards.
Exactly.
So just like money, right? I used to chase money, and the harder I chased it, the further I pushed it away. I get it, and it would fall through my hands like a sieve. And so I wasn't by chasing success, by chasing that viewpoint of success and chasing money as the measurement of success. I was chasing the wrong things. And it just set me up for massive failure. So first and foremost, stop chasing success. It's go read books like Jim Collins' Good to Great in that space and whatnot. And so, because if you're always chasing, you're always going to be striving and never arriving.
What does legacy mean to you? Legacy is another word that gets marketed around a lot as one of these surface terms. What does legacy mean to you personally? Going through the life, the struggles, the mission, what does that really mean to you?
Who you're created to be in this world. What are your values? And your legacy is how you live your values out. And if you're not clear on your core values, not just, and I mean, there's that word too, values gets thrown around in the marketplace a lot in leadership circles. And I've struggled with that in my early terms and whatnot. And I've tried to adopt other people's values to come into this space to make my own up. And, that sounds good. I'll take that. But no, that's not how you do that either. You got to really wrestle with this conversation, struggle with this conversation, challenge this conversation. And you don't want any more than 3. For me, my values are first and foremost love, and love in the space where it's love for myself, love for God, love for others, living life above the line, which is accountability, responsibility, and ownership of that conversation, that type of love, operating everything out of love. The second core value for me is transparency. But not that, I'm transparent with everything around me. And yes, I am. That's part of that. But the deeper level of transparency is when you see me, you see through me. I become translucent. And I'm only a bridge for you to get where you need to be in that space. And then the third core value is fun. That's why it's the laptop lifestyle dad, right? It's bringing that joy. It's bringing that fun. It's bringing that, it's not, yes, this is serious, like a heart attack type of conversation. But if I'm just serious all the time, then I lose the real heart and personality of Jeff. I lose that element. So this is why I lead with dad jokes. This is why I lead with the travel lifestyle and making sure that, we are bringing fun into the conversation.
Exactly.
So they're my deep 3 core values. And so your core values are who you are hardwired to be. There's like they're not forced. They're not, there's something you make up. They're you. And unless you know what your core values are, you're always going to be out of alignment because you never can be in that head, heart space, whatnot in there. And sorry, I've forgotten your legacy. What's the definition of legacy? So you've got to understand what your core values are to even think about leaving a legacy. And for me, legacy, if I reframe that word, is the impact that I leave behind. Right now, this conversation is a legacy conversation, right? And so the impact I leave behind is not when I'm gone, it's what I do every day and how I show up every day and how I operate every day. So that's why I come back to those values piece. Because if you're not clear on your core values piece, then how can you really be your truest, deepest self to leave a legacy behind? How can you be in alignment? You can't, right? So I attempt to work very hard at every conversation that I have, that I'm leaving a little seed of wisdom, a little seed of value, a little seed of gold in your heart so that, you collect these seeds and you plant these seeds, you nurture these seeds, whether it's me doing it or somebody else in your life doing it, that, you feed it the right nutrients, you feed it the right water, you feed it the right sunlight, that type of conversation so that you can grow. Because if you're not growing, if you're not green and growing, you're ripe and rotten.
Exactly.
That for me is legacy. And the word the word hero makers is part of that conversation because, I've had a few scares in my life where I've, almost, not here anymore. And then the conversation you start to have with yourself is how do you want to be recognized when you're not here? And for me, like, if I had to put one word on my tombstone when I'm not here, the one word that I want people to recognize and and talk about Jeff Ross to be here, that he was a hero maker.
Definitely a hero maker, Jeff, definitely. And creating other heroes to serve their lives, their families, and their communities. So another term of values that I pick up is, what do you stand for? What makes you rise?
Yeah.
If I was to come along and challenge someone for their values, will you stand up to me or will you kneel down? That's the other way I look at someone's intrinsic core values. Jack Welch, I'm a big fan of Jack Welch, who's probably the champion of management over the years. He has a famous quote that I've actually taken on part of mine and into my identity. And it's, you are the standard that you walk past.
Mm-hmm.
You accept the standard that you walk past. And it's like, it hit me when I first heard that. So, whoa, okay.
You get what you tolerate, and you get to keep what you fight for.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to that question, what do you stand up about? What gets your hackles up about your values? If someone was to poke you in the chest and say, hey, that is not you, what would be your response or reaction? That's the other way of core values.
Yeah.
Not the fluffy painted up on the wall and have a good look at the pretty colors and the mission.
It's almost what triggers that righteous type anger.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that type of anger, because we need that. That's passion. That's part of that calling space, because you get into a space where that's just wrong and that's evil. It's those things that fire up that, it's not even a reaction. I would call it more of a response, but it starts off as, it feels like a reaction.
Exactly.
It's getting in. This is that part, right? You can't get clear on your values in this piece if you're not intimate with yourself.
Exactly. And it's all about self-love, loving self and going through that. And folks, we're coming to the pointy end of this episode. So what role does failure play in building, in the forge, so to speak?
Brilliant question. It's funny how our secularized Western world looks at failure as such a bad term. Failure is a bad thing. You can't fail in school. You can't. If you fail your test, you're a dumb student. If you fail in society, you're a criminal type sort of thing. It's like the term failure is just, it's thrown around and used as a weapon. And I had to break free from this conditioning myself. And it really is, I believe, that the word failure in our Western world has been used as a tool to manipulate the masses. And when you become awake to this conversation, you start to realize how it's been wielded as a weapon. But see, the thing here is if you embrace failure for its truest, deepest meaning, failure is just feedback. And, when we learn how to walk, we learn how to not fall over by the attempts, by the failing forward conversation, by the feedback. We learn how to get our balance. When we learned how to ride the bike, we did the same thing. We learned how to not to fall off. I grew up, riding horses and breaking in horses. And a bushman taught me back then, one of Australia's top horsemen, and they says, Jeff, you don't know how to ride a horse until you've learned how to fall off 1,000 times. So go fall off 1,000 times and force yourself to fall off 1,000 times. Put yourself in positions to fall off 1,000 times. Go get bucked off that fucking horse, mate, is what he said. And so I did. So when you learn to embrace failure in this way, you get rid of fear.
Exactly.
And fear no longer controls you in that space. And so you don't want to be stupid about it. You want to be smart and sensible about it. There's a whole different conversation about being reckless versus putting yourself into a position where you're putting yourself into embrace lessons and feedback. But see, if we embrace the word failure like we do today, I wonder if, the Wright brothers, if they embrace failure like we do today, we wouldn't have flight as we know it today. They would have given up after their first attempt. If Thomas Edison embraced failure like we do today, we wouldn't have the light systems that we do today, because he would have given up on his first attempt and not going for the 1,000th attempt or the 10,000th attempt, whatever it took to create light bulbs. Yeah, embrace failure.
Exactly.
And failure is just feedback on how to pivot and adjust and improve.
Exactly right. Dad used to always tell me, son, he's like, if you want to learn to ride, go find 13 unique ways to get bucked off a horse. And then you'll have 13 different ways to taste the dust. And then you'll have 13 questions to ask me on how to improve.
Yep.
Until then, get back on the horse. Keep going.
Yep.
That's what I did. With horses, donkeys, you name it. Bareback,
Yeah. And I learned to ride before I could walk. Conversation. And so, but we did it in a safe environment. I started learning riding miniature ponies, and then I went into, riding old nags and, doing all of that sort of thing. But then when I got into my by the time I was 12, I was actually starting to break in horses. And, I think in our helicopter generation, actually, I know we're going a bit over time here, but I've got to share this story. I think it's really relevant. In our helicopter generation, we set kids up for, I can't think of a better term, right? But we set them up for failure. Right. So there's that side of that conversation as well. But we just had some family members visit down over the weekend. Right. So on Sarah's side of the family, her oldest sister come down with a couple of her kids, and her oldest kid is 20. They've been grown up and nurtured and fostered in this helicopter generation. They can't go do that because they'll get hurt. They can't go down that side because they'll get hurt, wrapped them up in bubble wrap. This 20-year-old, it was raining. She wanted to go to Wineglass Bay and climb do the bushwalk. Now, do the bushwalk, if you've never done it before, in horrible conditions in Tasmania, people have been killed, and get caught up in that, and they get lost and they can get killed. We actually just had a story at Crowder Mountain, Chinese tourists, lost their life because they went out into different conditions and poor conditions. And so the landscape here in Tasmania, you've got to remember, we're only our next island over is Antarctica. So we're close to Antarctica, and so the weather can get pretty rough and turn pretty quickly. Anyways, my aunt, my sister-in-laws told their niece that, no, we're not going to go climb this mountain. It's just dangerous. Well, didn't she chuck a 3-year-old tantrum spit because she didn't get her own way? And she stormed off and pouted and all that thing. And she's 20. Hey, but I used to do the same thing at 20 if I didn't get my own way, because we, in our hedonistic, in our consumerism, in our individualism culture, instant gratification, microwave society, we expect things just to be handed on a silver platter, and it breeds this entitlement. And so we've sheltered a generation from making mistakes, from like how you and I, our father said, go ride that horse, son, and go get bucked off. Like if you hurt yourself, cool, we'll deal with it. To this pendulum swing to the other extreme where we've overprotected and over sheltered. So this microwave society where basically people are afraid of making mistakes, they're afraid of failure, to the point now that they're still little 3-year-olds running around in 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds bodies.
Exactly right. Failure breeds. It helps build resilience.
Yeah. Well, how do you know how not to touch the hot stove unless you actually touch the hot stove?
Exactly right. And we've actually culturalized a society where we judge a character and a behavior as one.
Yeah.
Instead of splitting the two, love the character, change the behavior.
Yeah, well said.
If that makes sense. Notice that a lot with particularly with men, working with men in and out of prison. The other labels and the boogeymen that get created out of that. It's like, hang on, what they did, that behavior may not be the best to serve themselves or the community, but look at what else they've done. They've achieved. Yeah. They may have achieved a whole heap of accolades and awards through their life. Yet one mistake, and it's like judged as if it's all over.
Yeah, and this is also too, though, why we have a lot of leaders in today's world falling from grace.
Yeah, exactly.
They've risen up through the ranks with all of the accolades and all of that sort of thing, but haven't tested the character enough to form the character for them to handle the pressures of leadership, which is sometimes taking on burdens and pressures that are not designed for them to take on.
Exactly. They haven't cut the mustard, so to speak, or been forged.
Yeah.
Under pressure.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, this show, and this final question, we're at the pointy end now, viewers. This show is called The Legacy Forged for a reason. If this conversation was the only record left behind of your work and your life, what's one message you'd want to be etched in stone for your kids, your community, and the world to remember?
Powerful question. I think just to sum up the conversation we're just having, embrace failure, because in that space you're going to find yourself, but do it from a base of growth. And you can only do that if you're intimate with yourself. Like, you can look at yourself in the mirror and truly say, I love you, and smile and deeply mean it. Don't fake it till you make it. That's bullshit. You can be it till you become it type sort of conversation, but you've got to understand your self-worth, your self-identity, self-evaluated love space, and to know yourself to be true into that conversation, and then have a mission in life. Like, I'm not just talking that lightheartedly. That needs to be part of your core DNA, because up until the point where I did try to kill myself, I was living for everybody else. I wasn't living for myself. I was trying to please everybody else, trying to perform to that expectation of what I put on myself. It was self-imposed expectations, but I was trying to perform, and I was trying to conform, and I was trying to impress everybody else. And that was just empty, and that was just superficial. And until the moment where I got clear on my strengths, my weaknesses, my values, my purpose, my mission, my vision, that calling piece to align up with my assignment piece, I was just flapping in the wind. I was wasting life. So get clarity on what that looks like quickly as you can, and go deep with that, wrestle with that, struggle with that, doubt that, challenge that. Because it's in that in that space you'll become informed, and in that informing you'll become formed, and in that forming you'll become the person that you're created to be, and the character will be built and developed along the way to help support that conversation. And don't be afraid to put yourselves in position to fail. Strive for greatness in that. Don't just strive for greatness. Work towards impact, work towards purpose, work towards peace and joy and happiness. Work towards being a purpose-driven life.
Exactly. Failure is the forge.
Yeah.
And we reframe from the fake it till we make it to act as if.
Yeah. But also, just to go a little bit deeper, that without the purpose piece, without the mission piece, you will not push yourself to go through that forge piece to get to the other side.
Yeah.
And I'll recap it here. If it's the last conversation that ever gets recorded, I think this is important just to really highlight. Look at all of the great leaders of our time. Go right back to the Bible stories even too. And the one that jumps out for me is look at Paul, Saul of Tarsus. He went through his own transformational journey in that space to find this whole conversation that we're talking about, DC. So dissect that, go deep on that conversation. And you can see the purpose and the mission that he was given for his life, his calling for his life, so much so that he could not put it down. It was a part of him. It was part of him so much so that he got flogged, he got imprisoned, he got rocked, he got shipwrecked, and nothing stopped him until the day he was actually martyred, in that space. But he went to his death with that conviction, with that purpose, with that truth. And look what he's left behind. Without Paul, we don't have the ministry that we have today.
Exactly right. And that's the foundations of legacy, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, thank you very much. We are at the conclusion of today's episode 5, Multiplying Leaders and Legacy. I just want to give you a quick thanks, Jeff,
Thank you.
for all what you do in the Hero Makers in duplicating leadership. This is purpose. This is legacy. Like and subscribe on all major platforms, Apple and Spotify. And jump on YouTube and catch the video feed. Until the next episode, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff, for all the work, and thanks for watching. See you next time, guys. Bye for now.